What's going on, Bottom Line viewers? It's Mitch back here of the Bottom Line View with my NFL Stardom and Situm for week number 11 of the 2017 season. We're getting almost there. We're a couple weeks away from playoffs in your fantasy football season, and there's no more important time to get these starts and sits for your fantasy team to make sure that you're playing the right players to pick up those big victories. So I'm going to give you 5 starts and 5 sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. Let's start off with the quarterback position and Alex Smith. Alex Smith plays the New York Giants, and if you've been paying attention to football this season, you've noticed that the Giants defense is not very good. Their defense has allowed an average of more than 22 fantasy points a game to quarterbacks in the Big Apple. Alex Smith has been shredding it all season long, and he has been unreal all season. This is the best season of Alex Smith's career. I think he continues it against the Giants. You also throw in the fact that Andy Reid is 16-2 after a bye, and it looks like the Chiefs will be out to a big victory in New York with Alex Smith putting up a ton of fantasy points. Kirk Cousins versus the New Orleans Saints. The Saints, yes, have been impressive this season and have been especially impressive over the past couple of weeks. But they've only really faced 2 fantasy-relevant quarterbacks this entire season, Tom Brady and Matt Stafford. And in those games, they gave up 6 total touchdowns. Kirk Cousins is in that top 3 relevant quarterback fantasy conversation against the Saints. And I think Kirk Cousins is going to have a nice game. Whether the Saints win this game by a lot or a little, Kirk Cousins will bring the Redskins to the red zone, and he'll end up scoring. Kirk Cousins has been playing really well. He played well on the road against a very good Vikings defense. I think the Vikings defense better than the Saints defense. And I think that Kirk Cousins gets it done here against the Saints, adding him to the list of quarterbacks that are fantasy relevant that get it done against the Saints. Phillip Rivers versus Buffalo. The Bills have surrendered 30-plus points 2 weeks in a row. Rivers actually had the best game all season against the number 1 defense, the Jacksonville Jaguars, against the pass, and Phillip Rivers had the best game. I think Phillip Rivers against Buffalo. Buffalo is on the ropes. They look like they're losing out for the rest of the season. They've started a new quarterback. It looks like everyone's giving up in Buffalo. And now that Buffalo has to travel all the way to Los Angeles to play this game, I think Phillip Rivers at home is going to have a nice day throwing against the secondary that's been kind of exposed over the past couple of weeks as phony. So I'm going to go with Rivers as a start this week against Buffalo. Jay Cutler versus Tampa Bay. If you're desperate, I'm sure Jay Cutler is out there. But the thing about Jay Cutler is he's actually been playing well for fantasy purposes over the past few weeks. Cutler actually has multiple passing touchdowns in the past 4 games in a row. He now plays a Tampa Bay defense that sure had a good game against the Jets, but has not been good over the course of this season. And I look for Jay Cutler to have a nice day in this game against a defensive line that can't really rush the passer and a secondary that's weak overall. Matt Ryan versus Seattle. Now, I have a couple of Atlanta players on the Stardom and Situm this week, and I'm simply going to say 3 names, and I'm going to say yes or no. No Sherman, no Thomas, and no Chancellor. Matt Ryan should have a nice day here against Seattle. Whether it's in Atlanta or in Seattle, doesn't really matter. Matt Ryan and the Falcons, they need this big victory here to stay in that wild card running. This is a huge game for the NFC playoffs, and Matt Ryan has all his weapons at his disposal, except for Devontae Freeman, and the 3 best players for the Seattle Seahawks are out. My quarterback sits this week. Eli Manning versus Kansas City. Quarterbacks are averaging just 9.5 fantasy points versus Kansas City in their past 4 games after a bye week. Like I said, Andy Reid is 16-2 after the bye week. And a lot of this, people are looking at Kansas City as a defense that can be had, a defense that's not very good. And I feel the very same way. But typically, Andy Reid makes those adjustments for his entire team after the bye week. I expect him to have made a couple of adjustments to his secondary and his defense. And against a team like Eli Manning and the Giants that have no weapons, Sterling Shepard is now out. They really only have Evan Ingram to focus on. I don't see how Eli Manning is going to get it done this week against Kansas City. Andy Dalton versus Denver. The Broncos are still 8th versus the pass this year, despite playing the Patriots and the Eagles back-to-back weeks, and are still first on third down. So that just goes to show how well they played before those two games. Don't let those two games against the two best teams in the league allow you to start Andy Dalton, who has been terrible against actual good defenses this season. He's played well in good matchups, but in bad matchups, he has played exactly that. Bad. Dak Prescott versus the Philadelphia Eagles. No Zeke, no Tyron Smith, no receivers that really scare a defense, and oh yeah, the Philadelphia Eagles have a pretty good pass rush last time I checked. Everything relies on the run game for Dak. Without Zeke, without a consistent run game, and definitely without a left tackle, Dak Prescott's in trouble. Adrian Claiborne, a guy that's known as a run stuffer, got 6 sacks against this Dallas offensive line, and now you're going to talk about Brandon Graham and Chris Long and Fletcher Cox. I don't see it happening for Dak this week in terms of big production. He might have an okay game, but I don't expect anything better than okay this week. Jared Goff versus Minnesota. The Vikings haven't surrendered 20 points at home yet this entire season. Jared Goff has actually struggled with upper echelon defensive lines like Seattle, like the Redskins, like the Jaguars. Jared Goff has not played very well in those games. The Vikings have an upper echelon defensive line, and the Vikings, like I said, are very good at home on defense. And I just think that this game is going to come down to not necessarily Jared Goff, but everybody around him if they can make the plays, because Jared Goff, I think, is going to be out of his element in this game. I think this is going to be one of those games where we really see that Jared Goff isn't quite there yet. Yes, he's played a lot better this year, but I think that you could see a couple of mistakes from Jared Goff against a good defense in a tough environment like Minnesota. Blake Bortles versus the Cleveland Browns. Guys, don't even think about it. It's Blake Bortles. He played awful against the Chargers. Sure, the Browns secondary sucks, but don't even think about it. It's in Cleveland. People actually think Cleveland have a chance to win this game, which I don't, but it's not going to be because Blake Bortles puts on a show. Blake Bortles is going to go into a tough environment in Cleveland. It might be raining or snowing. Cleveland's run defense has actually been pretty good, and in those games where Cleveland's run defense in general has been good against Jacksonville, Blake Bortles has struggled. So I expect Blake Bortles to struggle in this game against Cleveland, even though, again, it is Cleveland. My running back starts this week. I have Tevin Coleman versus Seattle. Devontae Freeman is out, so that makes Coleman automatically a number 1 running back. The Hawks have surrendered 5 double-digit standard fantasy performances this season to running backs. That's better than usual against the Seattle Seahawks. I think, like I said with Matt Ryan, those 3 top players for Seattle is going to really take a hit to the Seahawks defense, to their confidence, and to their swagger. And I think that Tevin Coleman, with the amount of touches he's going to get, is going to provide you a quality fantasy number 1 performance this week. Christian Thompson versus New Orleans. The Saints defense has given up a total of 8 of the top 20 performances to running backs this season. Thompson, I think, is going to have a very nice game here. Kelly is not playing. Perrine is now playing, and I think they really trust Thompson as their number 1 guy. He is explosive. He's nice in the passing game. He's good in the running game, and he's their best shot to break down the Saints defense this week in week number 11. Jerick McKinnon versus the Rams. The Rams have given up the 2nd most PPR points to opposing runners on the road this year. McKinnon has been playing very well. He doesn't get all the touches, but when he does get the ball, he's explosive. He is more versatile than Murray, and they've really shown a want to get McKinnon the ball. The Vikings are riding high on offense. Keenum's playing well, Diggs and Thielen are playing well, and McKinnon is playing well. And I think in a game where the Rams are one of the most challenging offenses that the Vikings have had to play, that the Vikings offense in turn is going to have to rise to the occasion. And usually when they've played good offenses this year, the Vikings have been able to rise to the occasion and play well on their side of the ball on offense. So I think McKinnon will have a nice game here against a defense that I think is a little bit overrated. The Patriots running backs versus the Oakland Raiders. The Raiders have allowed the 5th most PPR points to backs overall this season. Being that the Patriots are so unpredictable really with their running backs, they really split the ball up amazingly between all 3 of their starting running backs, Dion Lewis, Rex Burkhead, and James White. The first 2 being more relevant to really the past couple of performances for their team. It seems like Lewis and Burkhead are becoming more of those guys. James White still comes down on third down, and they love him in that situation, but they really realize that Burkhead and Lewis are those first and second down players, and I think both those guys will have outstanding games against the Raiders. I don't see how the Raiders are going to stop the Patriots, to be quite honest with you, and the Raiders being bad against running backs helps this case even more. So I like every Patriots running back this week, leaning more towards Lewis and Burkhead, but also White. If you want to play him, you can, depending on your situation on your team. Kenyon Drake versus Tampa Bay. Drake already has 2 carries of 40-plus yards this season. He's shown to be explosive, fast, quick, and great through the hole, and only Kareem Hunt actually has more 40-plus yard runs this season than Kenyon Drake. Tampa Bay, like I said, is not a very good defense, and this is a game that Miami can realistically win at home, so Drake should have a pretty good game. My running back sits, Alfred Morris versus Philly. The Eagles have surrendered a league-low 43.5 rushing yards a game on the road this season. That's less than 50 yards. Alfred Morris had a terrible game against a weak defensive line, and defensive line in terms of running defense against Atlanta. Now he plays the best run defense in the entire league in the Philadelphia Eagles. Tyron Smith is still out. Alfred Morris has not shown that burst, and I don't see Morris having a successful day against the Eagles. Joe Mixon versus Denver. Denver's defense has surrendered just 70.5 rushing yards to the position at home. Even though they got blown out against the Patriots last week, they did a good job against a good running attack in New England of limiting their yards per carry. Joe Mixon in the Cincinnati run game has been inconsistent to say the least, and really non-existent for the most part, especially against good defenses. I think this is a game where Denver's defense rises to the occasion. I think they come back and they have a good bounce-back game here at home, where Denver is typically a lot better. And I just expect Joe Mixon to be bottled up by this defense that's going to be motivated and into the game. Marshawn Lynch versus New England. The Patriots have allowed just 1 rushing touchdown since week 5. A lot of people are buying into Lynch this week, given New England's stats in the first 5 weeks were not so pretty. But recently, the Patriots have been pretty good against the run. And I expect Marshawn Lynch, a guy that has sucked all year long, to not break that trend. So call me crazy, but Lynch is a sit for me this week. Adrian Peterson versus Houston. The Texans have allowed just 1 rushing touchdown the entire season. This is the most skeptical of my sits this week, but Houston has typically been very good against the run, and a lot of that actually has to do to the fact that they are terrible against the pass. I actually think with Blaine Gabbert at quarterback this week, that they'll be able to pass the ball. Drew Stanton, in my opinion, is not much of an upgrade, if any. I think Gabbert is probably a better player than Stanton is. So coming into this game, I think that a guy like Ellington, who is more of the passing down back, could have a nice, sneaky start appeal in this week. But for Adrian Peterson, a guy that is relying on 30-plus carries against a good run defense and a defense that's only allowed 1 rushing touchdown all season, I don't see it happening for AP. Latavius Murray versus the Rams. The Rams have not allowed a touchdown to a running back in 3 games. Murray is going to be playing mostly behind McKinnon all game, and I think McKinnon is going to be more influential to their game plan this week. I don't really see Murray having a huge role in this game, seeing as how the Rams D-line is pretty dominant against the run, and they're typically worse against the pass. So I would go with McKinnon over Murray this week. My wide receiver starts. I have Brandon Cooks versus the Raiders. The Raiders are 28th versus the pass the last 5 weeks. Cooks has been a little bit on and off this year due to the fact that the Patriots aren't exactly utilizing him as the #1 target in their offense. Of course, they have Gronk, and they also have these amazing running backs, as I discussed, that catch the ball, run the ball, and do everything. But Brandon Cooks, I expect to have a huge game. There's no corner out there on Oakland that can cover him. Cooks has had a couple tough matchups so far this season, and I expect him to have another huge game, which he's had a couple times this season against some of the worst pass defenses he's played. So expect a big Cooks play this week against the Raiders. Tyreek Hill versus the Giants. G-men have allowed a league-high 20 passing touchdowns this year. I said that Alex Smith's a start. Therefore, Tyreek Hill is a start. He's his number one wide receiver, and I expect Tyreek Hill to, look, Robert Woods had like an 80-yard screen pass. Imagine what Tyreek Hill is going to do, who would probably beat Robert Woods by like a 30 yards in a 100-yard sprint. So Tyreek Hill is going to be explosive this week, coming off the bye, rested, ready to go. I think he's ready to explode against the G-Man. Mohamed Sanu versus Seattle. I'll do it again. No Sherman, no Chancellor, no Thomas. Sanu has been a little rusty the last couple of weeks, but with those players out and with the Seattle defense having to worry about Julio, I expect that second or third corner to end up covering Mohamed Sanu, where Sanu should really have a nice day. Jarvis Landry versus Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is one of the worst defenses in the entire league against slot receivers. Jarvis Landry leads the NFL, I believe, or he's at least behind Antonio Brown in receptions this year. And despite the yards per catch being down, his touchdowns have been up, his catches have been there, and in PPR, he's been a nice, reliable option. In standard, I also believe he'll be a nice option this week. Against the Tampa Bay defense, like I said, not very good. Jay Cutler's a start for me. Multiple touchdowns 4 weeks in a row. Jarvis Landry should maybe grab one of those touchdowns and a bunch of catches against the Bucs. Keenan Allen versus Buffalo. The past 5 top receivers against the Bills have averaged 13.4 fantasy points a game. Buffalo has been unable to really corral those receivers, and Keenan Allen has had a bunch of terrible matchups. I just think it's been more of that than Keenan Allen playing poorly. So I expect Keenan Allen to have a really nice bounce-back game here against the Bills. Like I said, Rivers is a start. Allen is a start for me as well. My wide receiver sits. Jordy Nelson versus Baltimore. Jimmy Smith is actually the number 1 rated Pro Football Focus corner. The Baltimore Ravens will be all over Jordy Nelson, and the past 3 weeks in a row, he's barely even caught 6 passes. Nelson has not been Hundley's number 1 target. That's actually been Devontae Adams. And I expect Jimmy Smith to be all over Nelson, opening up Adams maybe to have a decent game, but not Nelson. Dez Bryant versus the Eagles. Bryant comes into Week 11 against the Eagles with 3 games in a row without a touchdown. Dez has not been good this season as it is. Dak without Tyron Smith, without the ability to run the ball. It trickles down on the entire offense, and that trickles down to Dez Bryant. Dez Bryant is a guy that relies on this offense to run the ball and to hit him deep, and that hasn't been the case this year or in this game against the Eagles. Kelvin Benjamin versus LA. Kelvin Benjamin already has a tough task of facing Casey Hayward, who's one of the most underrated corners in the entire league, but also he's having to deal with a rookie quarterback on a short week, which he has no chemistry with at all coming from the Panthers. I don't see Benjamin having a big game, maybe other than 1 fluke touchdown, but I just don't really see it happening. Sammy Watkins versus Minnesota. The Vikings are the 4th best in the entire league versus number 1 wide receivers. You can credit that a lot to Xavier Rhodes. Now, some may argue that that's Robert Woods, which by production value it is, but a lot of teams see Sammy Watkins as the more valuable and player that is harder to stop. So more often than not, the number 1 corner takes Sammy Watkins against the Rams, and I think that Robert Woods might have an okay game, but Sammy Watkins, not so much. Corey Coleman versus the Jaguars. The Jaguars already the best D versus the pass in the entire NFL, and Corey Coleman just got back from injury. It's going to take a little bit of time, especially like I said, it might be rough weather out there for the Browns and the Jags. My tight end starts, Evan Ingram versus Kansas City. No Shepard, so that means even more targets for Ingram, who has been used more as a wide receiver. Yeah, Kansas City's been good against tight ends, but Ingram is their only guy to pass to, and he's been really consistent. Austin Hooper versus Seattle. Only 4 tight ends have been targeted at least 6 times in the past 3 weeks, and Austin Hooper is one of them. Start him against Seattle, especially with Chancellor and Thomas out. Tyler Kroft versus Denver. Denver has allowed the 3rd most catches and the most receiving yards to opposing tight ends this year. I believe Tyler Kroft is, if there's any week to start him, it's this week. I think AJ Green will have a tough time, but I think Tyler Kroft should find the middle of the field available. Vernon Davis versus New Orleans. Vernon Davis has 13 catches for 148 yards on 20 targets the past 2 games. VD is playing really, really well in spot for Jordan Reed. I think in this game against New Orleans, who's not been the best against tight ends, I expect Davis to have a nice game overall. Cam Brate versus Miami. Miami has allowed a tight end to score or gain 100 receiving yards in 4 straight games. I think this is where Cam Brate bounces back, has a nice game with Fitzpatrick as his quarterback. that's my stardom and sit-em for week number 11. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more NFL content. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View. Thanks for watching. Good luck to your fantasy team. Peace out.